Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of the podcast. I want to welcome you here to a new show. We have a good topic here today, but before we get there, I just want to mention that this podcast is all about HR, world of work, leadership, and anything that connects to the workplace. And so, all of our episodes are dropped on Thursday morning normally, and our guests are from all over the world. And the episodes live on our website, ScaleHR.com, and also on our YouTube channel as well. So this is a really good topic, as I always say that. So this is called How to Be the Strategic HR Partner Your CEO Actually Listens to. So as a former HR leader, this one was near and dear to my heart, and we have fantastic guest on our show today, Lianne Vineberg, and I'm going to bring her in just a minute. But I just want to set the stage, set the context with what we're talking about here in this episode. And so the first point is what I call the CEO HR gap. So every HR leader wants to be seen as a partner. So they want to be at the table, so forth, but may end up stuck in execution mode. So they're in execution mode, they're not really working on strategy. And that happens a lot. I think the second part of that is the gap between what CEOs expect and what HR teams think their role is has never been wider. And I think that's true. I talk to a lot of people about this, and they all tend to say the same things, especially post-COVID. So CEOs want clarity, insight, and business impact, not just policies, hiring updates, and problem solving. So there's a gap there. The second point is strategy is a language, not a title. And so being strategic isn't about having HR in your job title. It's about understanding the business, translating talent issues into financial impact, and influencing decision makers. Okay, so today we're going to unpack all of that and so what it actually takes for HR leaders to earn a seat at the table. We've talked about that for decades, and how to communicate in a way CEOs will pay attention to. So this is a really good episode. And so Lianne Vineberg is our guest, and I want to welcome you to the Unmuted Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So before we get into our episode, I just want to say, Lianne and I have a long history. We go back to the days of a company known as XM Satellite Radio Canada. Yes. I don't remember the year that I worked there because it was so long ago.
20 years ago, probably?
Yeah, so that was it that long?
Yeah.
Shit, okay. Well, you are younger than me. So yeah, so those were good times when the company was rather interesting. So let's dive into our topic here. Let's give the audience an overview of what you do.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. My name's Lianne Vineberg. I run a HR and recruitment consulting firm called T6 Talent Partners, and we partner with early to mid-stage companies globally. We help them build out a foundational HR practice, a strategic HR practice, so that and we also do recruitment as well, and we build those programs as well. But for this topic, we'll focus on HR. And our goal is primarily to help them build strategic programs early enough so that they're not chasing their tail when they get too big, and then they're behind the eight ball. So that's really our focus, is getting in and changing the narrative around people and talent to really be a strategic partner at the table. So this is an opportune topic for us to discuss.
Absolutely. So we've talked about this one before, obviously, and we were sharing from my day at XM, but I'm not going to go there. But unless you want to.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Okay, so let's dive into
still my favorite job. Still my favorite job to this day.
Really? Okay.
Well, I wasn't in HR at that. I wasn't in HR at that point. I wasn't in HR at that.
You probably didn't want to be, but anyway. Yeah, it was fun. I remember when we did the auto show, and XM was part of that. Yeah. So that was fun. Okay, so let's get into our first question. Okay, so from your personal experience, what do CEOs really expect from their HR leaders, and then what makes them take someone seriously as a strategic partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question I see a lot with like very junior folks starting off, is that they don't know how to build that relationship and that bond. And I think part of the issue is CEOs have CEOs of very small companies have pretty low expectations from HR. They haven't necessarily had great experiences, or they've had no experience. So all they see are the memes and the jokes and whatnot on TikTok and Instagram. And so they hire it because they know they need it. They hire it because everyone keeps telling them they need it. But at the end of the day, they don't really have high expectations. And it's not, I don't think it's malicious. I just think they haven't experienced great. On the flip side, those who have experienced great are coming in with a level of expectation that is very important to understand before you take that job, because they've now seen great and their expectation moving forward for the rest of their will be great. So just coming in, I think there's a credibility gap. And that it's our job to come in there and close it quite quickly. It's also, if you're an early stage HR person, this is your opportunity to show your CEO what great can be. So I would say there's like 3 easy ways to do this. The first one is you have to focus on like a low cost, high impact win. I'm going to talk a lot about like high cost, low impact, high impact, low cost, high impact, all of those things, and sort of thinking about programs like that. But you have to show results quickly. And they can't be results around like, oh, we bring in lunch on Mondays, right? They can't be those kind of things. But they also, surprisingly, can't be things that are super important, like, oh, we've just redone the entire benefits plan and it actually, the employers are super happy about it. Because the CEO is not thinking about that. What the CEO is thinking about is the business. And so the base level is you're going to build a great benefits program. And the base level is you're not going to drive us into bankruptcy. So those are the 2 ends, and those are the baseline expectations. Now you have to go in, you have to actually deliver something that is going to be able to show them value. I love when people start with onboarding, because onboarding is just like the quickest one. That's super measurable. It's super obvious to everybody. And then it drives, which is the second thing, which is data. The easiest way to win a seat at the table is to lead with data. So more often than not, we're seen as a cost center, right? We don't present like the other business units. We sit at these meetings and we talk about feelings and emotions. And it's like, you very often get cut off, right? And you don't get your time at the round table to bring up things. And that's because we're not bringing forward the information in the way that every other business leader is bringing forward the information. And so there are so many incredible ways to drive HR with metrics. And so you have to bring that to the table. You have to show patterns. You have to bring external benchmarks. You have to bring research. You have to show up with the same rigor that finance is showing up with and sales is showing up with, because that perception shift is going to happen quickly. And then the third thing is balance the employee's need with the business needs. So you can't, like I said, you can't come in and just start spending all the money in the world on things that aren't going to stick with the CEO and say, oh, this is really driving performance. And so you have to think about things with like value, risk, growth. All of that needs to be incorporated in how you're thinking about building programs and doing things for the employees and how they match with the needs of the business. Those are my 3 steps.
One of my earlier, mentors early on in my career, he was a CHRO. He said to me, the question that you need to answer is, so what? And then the second question after that is, how does that translate into, business outcomes? So if you can answer those 2 questions and you can actually clearly articulate that to leadership, then you're on the right path, because they can understand it. As you said, if you come in with big glitzy words and feelings and emotion, while they may get it or empathize or understand, they're not going to make that connection.
I think it's also, I think it's important to remember that like you can care about the people as individuals, and there's very few CEOs out there who don't. Like when I talk to CEOs during due diligence, one of the questions that I always ask is like, what keeps you up at night? And the number one thing that they all say, all of them, aside from kids and, things like that, is there's so many families that are relying on me to pay their mortgage and buy their groceries and go on vacation. And so all of these things, they do sit on them. But at the end of the day, you're not going to win by trying to deeply embed yourself in that part of their emotional regulation, because that's not going to help them pay the bills, right? It's going to help them continue to pay everybody if the business is succeeding, if the business is moving forward. Somebody many years ago said, people before product. And my head sort of exploded. And people have heard this from me 1,000 times, but it's not people before product and it's not people before profit. It's a circle. You can't put one without the other, right? You need great people to build great product. You need great product to drive profit. You need profit to get great people. It's a circle. And the minute you start thinking it's this linear pattern where all your employees have to be the happiest and the most grateful every day and they're so excited to be there, if that's what you're driving with your CEO, you're never going to win them over because one, it's impossible. And two, they can't keep hiring unless there's money coming in from somewhere. And so it's really important to show them that like you understand. Also, and this isn't really part of this conversation, but I'm going to say it anyway. As HR, you are not a chief happiness officer. You're a strategic partner. And your job, yes, part of your job is to make sure that your employees are safe, that they have a healthy work environment, that they are paid equitably. All of those things are very important. But after that, you're not there to make sure that every single day is the most joyous day of their life, right? That's like a nice added bonus when everyone leaves and they're like, that was a great day. But your goal is to make them amazing at what they're doing. I always say to people, if someone leaves you, if someone resigns and they go to another company and you're not upset about it, you should be embarrassed because that means you have someone who was not right for your organization, not delivering in your organization, going somewhere else. And you probably didn't invest in them, and they're probably not great, and they're not going to show up. They're going to give your company a bad rap because they're not a great person. Not a great person. They're not a great at whatever the job they're doing because you didn't invest in them.
Totally agree. So let's shift gears here just a little bit here. So many HR leaders get pulled into the admin and they're quote unquote firefighting, which I've had so many times, and you're shaking your head yes. So what are the concrete shifts they can make to move from being reactive to being truly strategic?
This is where people get stuck in the weeds, I think, a lot, as we've probably seen over our career. But one, you're never going to get rid of admin. You're never going to get rid of reactivity, right? Because our product is a person. So we can't debug a human. We can't sunset them from like a team dynamic. We can't do any of that stuff. So sometimes I think we wish we could, but we can't. So you have to sort of remind yourself on a regular basis, there's always going to be a part of your job that will be reactive, no matter how senior you get or how great you get. There will always be a part of your job that's admin. And that is for any leader out there in any business. For us, there's definitely more. And I think there are some like practical things. So I think I'll just I actually made a list because I was like trying to think, and I was like, hey, if I don't write a list out, I'm not gonna be able to get through all of them. So I'm just gonna give you a quick list so that if people are listening and actually want to write things down, they can. One, you have to build strong leaders. We'll go through and talk about them in a sec, but you have to build strong leaders around you. You have to protect your time for strategic work. You have to move from casework to pattern recognition. That's a huge one we can talk about in a sec. Self-serve infrastructure, right? It's 2026. Things should be automated. Things should be AI driven. Things should be documented without having to redo them 100 times. Things should be easily accessible for people. Getting very ruthless about prioritization because, like I said, not all admin work is low value. Some of it is extremely important. Anticipate risk before it becomes a crisis is a huge thing for HR leaders. And then embracing trade-offs. So I'm going to talk on embracing trade-offs first. And I think this is where a lot of people sort of fall into a rut and can't get themselves out. Good enough is very often totally fine if it means you can deliver and you can move on to higher impact work. So figuring out those trade-offs on what could be okay for now and what can't be. Not allowing yourself any room for trade-offs and trying to make everything perfect. One, you're slowing down the business. Two, you're not actually delivering anything because if you're in a high growth company, good enough is probably the right amount you want to do because when the next shift comes, you have to redo the whole thing anyway, right? When you move from 25 employees to 75 employees to 200 employees, every single program you built is going to be thrown by the wayside and has to be rebuilt because it's such a completely different dynamic. Forget about when you get to the 1,000 to 5,000 to 20,000. So you don't have to do everything. What you have to think about is what do we need to fix today? What is the problem we're going to face in 6 months? And can we prevent it now? And do we need to prevent it now? Right? So think about it the same way engineers build code. They're putting a lot of garbage in their code sometimes because sometimes it's easier to just paste in a little bit of garbage to keep things flowing if they know in 3 or 4 months they have to go back and sunset 98% of the
change it all
features.
over.
Yeah. So stop building to 100% when you're not going to get 100% out of something. So embrace those trade-offs. Pattern recognition is huge. I hear a lot of people, actually had this conversation last week with a client where I was talking to them about data, and they were saying there's no meaningful data. And I said, well, can you give me the data that you've collected so I can see what you mean by there's no meaningful data? She goes, well, we haven't collected any, but I know. And I promise you, you don't know, because I was thoroughly convinced that we had something going at one of my companies that was like perfect. And I never use that word, but I was like, this is running so well. This is amazing. And then someone on my team had like a meltdown out of nowhere. To me, it was out of nowhere. And I was like, what? Okay, something must be going on. You don't have a reaction like this to nothing. So I started digging, and I didn't know what I was digging for, but I was just trying to find the source of this explosion, which was completely justified in about 15 minutes of digging into what I thought was perfect. And each piece of information that I learned led to me digging a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. And if you go in and you say, I know there's no problem, but you haven't dug deep enough to see if there are problems, if there are issues, if there are patterns, it is impossible for you to drive good decision making. So rather than being reactive and working on each individual thing and siloing everything, really keep track, keep notes, look at it, and then reflect back, I would say, depending on how high growth you're going on a weekly basis, and say, is there a pattern here? What am I seeing? You may come back and say there's no pattern, which is a pattern. If you've ever taken stats, no pattern is a pattern. But if there really is nothing, then there's something else you have to go and find. And if there's something, then all of a sudden you have information. So I think the struggle that a lot of people have in driving that strategic partnership is they're so big, and where they're getting stuck in the weeds is they're so busy looking at every single thing as an individual instance versus building those pattern recognitions.
I definitely agree that that is a problem, because I was one of those people. Because obviously in HR, when you're trying to build credibility, you want to be as on the ball as you possibly can be, but that can be a detriment to your point. So I think it's almost like a mindset shift too. But also technically, like HR practitioners, leaders generally haven't been great at data anyways, and so.
Well, luckily, most of us are building tech companies. So there are engineering leaders that you can go and talk to and say, how can I pull from my system? That was literally how I got into this. I sat down with my CTO one day, and I had like a notebook of this, and I just looked at him and I said, what? And he's like, I can build something for this. And he was so excited about it, but we're so afraid to ask, right? We think we have to know everything. We don't. We just need to know who to ask.
100%. 100%. Okay, so what skills or habits help HR leaders translate people HR challenges into business terms that actually resonate with the CEO, like revenue risk, scalability, or a competitive advantage?
So the number one compliment that I've gotten from most CEOs that I've worked with has been, you really understand the business. And for most business unit leaders, like the way I build respect is by really deeply understanding their business. Now, that doesn't mean I come in understanding their business. It means I'm not afraid to sit down with them and say, teach me about your business from a 5th grade level. And I'm going to ask the dumb questions, and I'm going to ask the same question 3 or 4 times until I get it. And I'm going to ask you for an example. And so when you can step back after your first month in a role and you can fundamentally appreciate every business update that's happening in your Monday meetings or your Friday meetings or whatever, when you can sit at the table and have a conversation about what the board is going to want to see versus what the employees are going to need versus what the business needs, when you can start having that, you don't have to necessarily understand the nitty-gritties of valuations and EBITDA and all of those things, but you have to be able to understand the impact of them to the business. So I don't know if you do want an example. I can give a very funny example that I recently. I was working on a search for a head of sales, and I was talking to about 15 candidates, all from the same company. And they were all livid. and they had all just had their comp structures like completely ripped apart. They were lowered. Nobody had explained why. So their comp structure was lowered, but they hired more people. So now their comp structure was even lower than it was lower because now there was more people selling. Anyway, it was a disaster. And I'm talking with one of their senior people who eventually got the job. But as I was talking with him, I said, they switched. I had this moment where I said, they switched from revenue recognition to EBITDA in how they're compensating you guys, which changes how much money is actually coming in on every deal you make. And he was like, oh my God. Right. He understood this. Like, he comes from the EBITDA revenue world. And he goes, oh my God. He's like, you're right. And I said, the issue here is not that they switched it. The issue is that they switched it. They didn't talk about anyone about why, how, whatever, because this is a natural switch that happens at a certain stage. And they didn't talk to the team to figure out what was the best strategy moving forward to make sure that people were still earning their money. So they were losing their entire sales team, which is a problem because nobody had, anyway. So I get off the phone and I was like, how did that come out of my mouth? Because if you asked me to look at a spreadsheet and define revenue versus EBITDA and how that changes comp models, I couldn't do it. But I understand enough to know that revenue is revenue and EBITDA is after tax, blah, 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 blah. So I understood enough that they had made a switch in how they were compensating. And now that comes also from years of experience and being through with companies at different stages of growth. But it's really important if you were the HR person sitting at that table, because there was an HR person sitting at that table when they were coming up with those decisions. And my guess is they didn't understand what was happening and they didn't ask.
I totally agree with you. And I think actually, understanding the business is the biggest thing. I actually believe that because, this all started many years ago when I was asked to audit a new HR program in the school. I'm not going to name the school. Asked me to take a look at their new curriculum, okay, for the new HR program, whatever. So they were targeting future HR leaders, okay, that were in businesses and they wanted to kind of sort of upscale them and level them up into that they can get ready for being an HR leader. Fine. It took me no more than 5 minutes to actually look at the whole thing. And I actually uncovered the single thing that I thought, needed to change. That was this. There wasn't one single course on business, not one. It was all HR, technical HR, right? Which was fine. So I actually went back to them and I asked genuinely, is there a page missing? Because I actually thought there might have been maybe a page missing. Someone maybe I didn't get it. They said, no. This is it. And I said, well, I can't support it because there's nothing in here that talks about the business. So you're asking people that are in a business function to level up the skill to be a leader, but you're not teaching them business. This is a catastrophic failure. They didn't like it. They thought I was wrong. Fine. Okay, fine. But since that point, I started looking into that and I'm realizing that this is probably the biggest issue that I'm seeing is that the HR community, whether you're a leader or a practitioner, are not really taking the time to actually learn the actual business.
So we're not taking this. A lot of our people are not taking the time to learn. And then on top of that, so then how that is escalating is that when they're building onboarding programs, they're not building onboarding programs that help the business literacy of everyone they're hiring. So I have walked into companies where they're hiring 50 to 80 people a quarter, and their onboarding is in their business unit. And then they get sort of like a high level overview of the rest of the company. And I was like, no. I was like, onboarding should take anywhere from depending on the size of your company, a full week, like 5 full days, 9 to 5, up to an entire month. They should be sitting down with every business unit. They should be building the product. They should be logging in like a client. They should be doing all the pieces. They should be deeply understanding. I used to take my recruiters into a room and I drew out the entire organization. And then I talked about the different technologies that every piece of the organization uses and what they're responsible for and what they're owning and what they've built. I didn't talk about the people. I didn't talk about the dynamics of the team. They didn't need to know that yet. They needed to understand what the heck these people were actually doing in this company all day. Because there was no, we had in the fintech companies, you'll very often see there's a back office team that works in very old style code, right? Like .NET. No insult to anyone who uses .NET, but it's like an older technology. So, okay, no problem. But if you don't explain why that is, if you don't explain these fintechs, these very modern, brand new fintech companies are using .NET because our banking system is antiquated. And the only way to connect properly without it crashing on a regular basis is to be building in older frameworks that work for them. If you don't explain that, and they have to go out there and start hiring and onboarding and building out these teams, they don't understand what they're looking for. They don't understand how that group of people might differ in background and experience than your other teams, and you're going to have to adjust your culture to align with that. So I would say business literacy is really important. You have to turn people topics into impact statements. So you have to say things like, we need better, you can't say we need better onboarding. Like, that doesn't mean anything. But we're losing productivity because our time to impact is low. And our time to impact is low because people are sitting down at their desk 24 hours after walking into the company and expected to know everything. And so they're spending half their first month or 2 months or 3 months trying to find the bathroom, trying to find out who to ask for this, trying to figure out this. It doesn't make sense. I always say at the end of your onboarding, the end of a really good onboarding, the only thing you need to walk away with is, I know who to go to for every possible question I can ask. You know how much time that saves in a company if everyone knows who to go to? So talking about things like time to impact is way more important than saying, we need better onboarding, or we need leadership training. We don't need leadership training. We need to start reducing our risk of attrition by poor management, right? Those are the same, but very different. So we have to start using the language that they're using. We have to quantify. I will always take you back to data. It's always data. You have to talk about trade-offs and you have to talk about ROI. Trade-offs, again, are we doing this? Are we not doing this? If we don't do this, what's our risk? Is everyone comfortable with this risk? I will say to people all the time, I'll be sitting at a table and I'll say, if we don't do this, we are going to risk losing X, Y, and Z. If we are all on side with losing X, Y, and Z, I'm okay with not winning this argument. That's fine. Yeah. I'm happy to lose. I just need to know we're all on side. And then in terms of ROI, for those of you who don't know ROI means return on investment. There has to be an ROI on every program you build. And that's, again, where high cost, high impact, low cost, high impact. Very important.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I think most people know that great talent helps you scale. Great talent holds you back. You hope everyone knows that. Driving with some data and some good examples in those meetings very often helps. Yeah. And I don't want to get into hiring and firing, but it's always part.
So let's bring this back a full circle. So maybe you can share just one story of an HR leader who transformed their relationship with the CEO. What changed, what they did differently, and the impact it actually had on the organization.
Sure. This one's hard. I think more have had impact than haven't. So I'm going to use an example for me. It's hard to share someone else's examples because I don't want to call anyone out, but we
don't want to do names, say names.
But I've seen many HR folks come in and they start off soft and mushy, and then they start to realize that in order for them to be able to deliver some of that soft and mushy things, which are important, and we do like them as employees, I think we all value them, but you have to get a little bit tougher. But I came into an organization once that was growing very, very, very quickly and continually was talking. It was in all their speeches. It was everything in the papers and on the news and internally, and everything was talking about this company going public, which was weird to me because I do come from a business background. So before I got into HR, I was on the business side of things. So I also knew that it didn't make any sense for them to go public, but that was the narrative that they were going with. No problem. That was the narrative. That was the narrative we were going to run with. No problem. I came in. I had been there for about a week. I was, just sort of observing, meeting people, looking in the system, trying to get some data, and I realized there's no data. So this company had now been around for 4 years in very high growth mode, very high revenue, very high spend, but there was no data across anything, people, and talent. So it wasn't that things were bad. It wasn't that they were hemorrhaging people. It wasn't that they were losing. It wasn't that there was a legal risk, but there was no data. I went over to the COO on my first week and I said, can we talk for a minute? He's like, yeah, who is this? Who is this woman? But I was still he knew who I was. I was still high enough up that he had some idea. But I said to him, we have no data. He said, what do you mean? I said, there is no data. There's no historical data from the last 4 years. There's no setup to collect data moving forward. There's nothing. So I need to understand from a timeline perspective, how far off you think we are from an IPO or some type of major event where there's going to be bankers in here doing due diligence. Because right now, and this is funny because now in my second life, I do the due diligence, but I didn't know a lot then. I didn't know exactly what happened in due diligence, but I knew that due diligence required an HR portion. So I said to him, how far off are we? And he said, I don't know. He said, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years. And I said, okay, well, I can't. And they usually, and I had done a little bit of research. I had, Googled a little bit on Investopedia. So I didn't sound like such an idiot when I came into the room. I said, but usually they need about 3 years of data, right? He was like, yeah. I said, okay. We got nothing. So I need some type of timeline. And I also need from you, because I haven't been through this before, what are they typically looking for? Like in due diligence, what are they going to be asking for so I can prioritize getting that stuff in order as we drive forward? The immediate shift in our relationship was enormous. He knew I was on side for growth. He knew I understood the business, the investment side of things. When I brought forward future ideas, which weren't all like EBITDA and due diligence and IPO focused, they were, people focused. He was on side because he knew that we were driving towards the same goal. And he knew that I was able to build out these pieces that he didn't really understand to get to that goal, right? Which is the human side of it. And so it just changed our level of trust immediately. And so I think we remove ourselves too often from these conversations because we don't understand them, rather than just saying like, where does HR fall into this? How do we provide what you need? I haven't been, right? You say, I haven't been through this before. How can we help? Like people always say to me, they're like, oh, we're going to be IPOing. We need to have the people who's done this, this, and this. And I said, well, that person hadn't done it until they did it.
That's right.
So we can't keep
exactly
hiring the same 6 people, right? I can't keep hiring the same 6 CEOs and 6 heads of people and 6 CROs because they've been through it.
Especially in Canada.
Especially in Canada, 100%. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, really, the learning here is that you understood the business side of things enough to be able to ask questions, and that sort of breaks you through. Okay. So we've talked about quite a bit here, and so maybe if you can just mention, so what is one thing that our viewers can take away from this conversation?
I have 4. I actually wrote down 4. Can I do 4? They're very quick though. They're one line.
Okay, fine. 4.
Okay.
By the way, everyone, this is the first time in my history that people are doing 4, but that's okay.
Lianne, I'm doing 4. You can edit it and just pick your favorite. But okay, these are my 4 tips that I give to everyone who's going into an HR leadership role for the first time. 1, business literacy. 2 is plan for the 99, deal with the 1. Stop planning for the 1 and then dealing with the 99. That doesn't get you anywhere. Data is more meaningful than emotions. But emotions often drive us to look for data. So don't disregard emotions because they drive us to start looking and figuring out that something's wrong. And then, and this is what I've been saying since the first line, is your programs need to be either high value, low cost, or high value, high cost, but they should rarely, if ever, be low value, high cost. And that will drive the loss of trust amongst the leadership team. Those are my 4.
Fast. Thank you very much. Lianne, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. For everyone, this is the Unmuted Podcast. I'm Jeff, your host. So we talk about all things HR tech, talent, world of work, data, leadership, all that kind of stuff. And so, so thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was lots of fun.